The 1970s were a strange and fearless time for science fiction. Filmmakers dared to imagine worlds that were darker, stranger, and more technologically ambitious than anything audiences had yet encountered. In those years, scripts often bristled with ideas that studios would later deem too risky concepts that questioned authority, challenged social norms, or hinted at futures both wondrous and terrifying. Some of these films emerged as cult classics, while others were reshaped almost beyond recognition before reaching theaters, leaving only fragments of their original vision behind. Hollywood's touch could be both protective and destructive.
Scenes that were too complex, too violent, or too politically charged were excised.
Entire storylines were reworked. Characters were rewritten. The versions audiences eventually saw were sometimes shadows of the movies that had been meticulously plotted on page and storyboard. Yet, even in their altered forms, these films retained echoes of their original ambition, whispering hints of the stories that might have been. Today, nearly half a century later, these cinematic relics feel oddly prescient. The technological dreams and dystopian anxieties of that era resonate in our own digital age. Watching them now, we can glimpse the imagination of filmmakers who were willing to risk everything to tell stories that defied convention. We can speculate on what was lost, and we can marvel at what survived. In this countdown, we will explore 15 Sci-Fi films whose original scripts were completely different from what audiences eventually saw. Each story reveals a hidden layer, a behind-the-scenes choice, or a secret cut that altered the fate of the film forever. Some of these changes were practical, some political, and some shrouded in mystery, leaving only questions behind. So let's dive into 15 old-school sci-fi films that somehow still hold up today and uncover the studio secrets that transformed them into something quite unexpected. FACT1 Minority Report 2002. Before Steven Spielberg's Minority Report arrived on screen, the original script envisioned a much darker and more ethically ambiguous world. Early drafts delved deeper into the psychological toll of pre-crime, exploring the moral compromise and societal surveillance in granular detail. Certain sequences showing the invasive methods of law enforcement and the political ramifications of predictive policing were shortened or eliminated entirely. Studio pressures prioritized pacing and mainstream accessibility, resulting in the removal of intricate scenes depicting the darker consequences of predictive justice. Characters' motivations were simplified, and the narrative leaned more heavily on action-driven suspense, rather than contemplative ethical exploration. Spielberg's vision for a tension-filled, thought-provoking story was therefore streamlined to appeal to a wider audience. However, storyboard drafts and deleted scenes reveal glimpses of the original ambition, a society grappling with freedom, determinism, and moral responsibility in a technologically dominated future. The theatrical release, while thrilling and visually compelling, represents only a fraction of the narrative complexity and philosophical weight embedded in the initial script. FACT2 The Matrix 1999. Before the Wachowskis, The Matrix reached audiences. The original script contained sequences far more elaborate in philosophical depth and technological detail. The interplay between reality and simulation was explored with extended exposition on the machine's evolution, the moral dilemmas faced by rebels, and the consequences of awakening humans from the Matrix. Several sequences highlighting the systemic control and oppression exerted by AI were condensed or removed to maintain narrative momentum. Studio concerns over runtime and accessibility led to the removal or simplification of these dense sequences. Certain philosophical dialogues, intricate fight choreography setups, and background technological explanations were cut or visually compressed. The movie's theatrical cut focused more on stylistic action and visual spectacle, streamlining the complex narrative for mainstream audiences. Yet concept art storyboards and early script versions reveal a far richer, more cerebral vision. The subtleties of control resistance and moral ambiguity remain faintly perceptible, giving the film an intellectual undertone that rewards careful observation. The theatrical version, iconic as it is, conceals layers of philosophical inquiry that the original script intended to probe more fully. FACT 3 Back to the Future Part 1989. Before Robert Zemeckis' Back to the Future Part I reached theaters, the original script was far darker and more complex than the family-friendly adventure audiences eventually saw. Early drafts included extended sequences depicting the societal collapse in the dystopian 1985 Biff-controlled timeline, with grimmer consequences for Marty, Doc, and Jennifer. The mechanics of time travel were explored in greater depth, with additional paradoxes and moral dilemmas that challenged the very fabric of causality. Studio demands for a lighter tone and accessible pacing resulted in significant cuts. Many tense or ambiguous sequences were simplified or removed, entirely emphasizing visual spectacle, comedy, and action over philosophical or ethical exploration. Characters' motivations were clarified and streamlined, reducing the narrative complexity and moral tension originally planned. Still deleted scenes and storyboard sketches hint at the intricacy of the initial vision. The alternate 1985 timeline, with its societal degradation and more morally ambiguous character decisions, provides a glimpse into the darker narrative that could have unfolded. The theatrical release remains a beloved classic, yet it represents a sanitized, more digestible version of a story that originally grappled with far more weighty questions. FACT4 Event Horizon 1997. Before Paul W. Anderson's Event Horizon hit theaters, the script envisioned a far more psychologically disturbing and horror-laden tale. Original drafts included extended sequences of crew interactions, revealing deeper fears, traumas, and interpersonal conflict, as well as more graphic depictions of the ship's hellish dimension. The horror was intended to be both existential and visceral, exploring humanity's confrontation with absolute evil and the consequences of technological hubris. Studio concerns over pacing, rating, and audience tolerance led to substantial cuts. Many psychologically intense and graphic sequences were removed or toned down, and several character arcs were simplified to maintain clarity. While the visuals of the ship and its infernal dimension remained, the original script's tension, dread, and thematic depth were diluted to accommodate a faster, more linear narrative. Deleted scenes and script drafts reveal the richness of the story. Anderson initially conceived a deeper exploration of fear, morality, and the unknown. Even with these changes, the film retains echoes of its original ambition, hinting at a version of Event Horizon that would have been even more harrowing and thematically intricate than the theatrical cut suggests. FACT 5 Brazil 1985. Terry Gilliam's Brazil initially contained a script that was even more surreal, darkly comedic, and pessimistic than the version audiences eventually saw. Early drafts featured extended sequences of bureaucratic absurdity, oppressive government control, and dystopian terror. The protagonist, Sam Lowry, was given additional moments of psychological exploration, with a more ambiguous ending reflecting the ultimate futility of rebellion against totalitarian structures. Studio pressure for a more audience-friendly conclusion forced Gilliam to adjust several narrative elements. Some sequences depicting the oppressive power of the state were shortened or removed, while certain darkly humorous moments were muted to reduce perceived alienation. The ending was reworked in multiple iterations, balancing Gilliam's dystopian vision with studio requirements for clarity and accessibility. Nonetheless, the surreal, chilling essence of the original draft is evident in concept art, early storyboards, and deleted scenes. The narrative's layers of bureaucratic critique, personal despair, and satirical absurdity persist, offering viewers hints of a more uncompromising and challenging story. The theatrical release, while brilliant and visually arresting, represents a tempered version of Gilliam's audacious vision. FAC T6 Starship Troopers 1997. Before Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers reached the screen, the script painted a far darker and more satirical vision than the theatrical release suggested. Early drafts explored the political and military structures of the Federation with sharper cynicism, highlighting propaganda techniques and moral compromises of its soldiers. Scenes depicting the societal consequences of interstellar war were more graphic, exposing the ethical ambiguity of militarized obedience and humanity's complicity in systemic violence. Studio concerns over marketability and audience reception led to alterations that emphasized action and spectacle over subtle satire. Several scenes satirizing media manipulation and patriotic indoctrination were cut or simplified, while certain violent sequences were moderated to meet rating standards. The rich, morally complex narrative was therefore streamlined, leaving the spectacle of battle and visual effects as the primary focus, overshadowing some of the script's intended depth. However, traces of the original script survive in storyboarded sequences and behind-the-scenes commentary. The themes of obedience, propaganda, and societal critique remain faintly audible, suggesting a story that was intended to provoke reflection as much as entertain. The theatrical version, while visually striking and action-packed, obscures the darker social commentary that the original script had meticulously crafted. FAC T7, The Abyss 1989. James Cameron's The Abyss originally contained a script with greater psychological tension and narrative complexity than the version released in theaters. Early drafts included extended examinations of the characters' fear, paranoia, and interpersonal conflict under the crushing pressure of deep-sea isolation. The alien species' interaction with humans was initially subtler and more enigmatic, emphasizing philosophical questions about communication, trust, and the unknown, rather than straightforward visual spectacle. Studio demands and budget constraints required trimming numerous sequences, simplifying character arcs, and emphasizing visual effects over narrative subtlety. Scenes exploring the military's moral ambiguity and the psychological strain of the crew were shortened or removed, leaving only glimpses of the intended tension. The climactic sequences were altered to heighten visual drama at the cost of some of the script's philosophical and ethical intricacies. Despite these modifications, concept art deleted scenes and storyboard fragments hint at the depth and sophistication of Cameron's original vision. The final theatrical release dazzles visually and narratively, yet the script's unaltered version promised an even richer exploration of human psychology, ethical dilemmas, and the profound mysteries of the deep ocean, a reminder that studio intervention can shape not only what we see, but how we perceive the story itself. FACT 8 Akira 1988. Before Katsuhiro Otomo's adaptation of Akira was finalized, the screenplay envisioned a far more politically charged and darker narrative than the final release. Early drafts contained additional sequences exploring Neo-Tokyo's societal collapse, including explicit depictions of government experiments, political conspiracies, and public unrest. Tetsuo's transformation was scripted with more psychological complexity, revealing internal conflicts and moral ambiguity, that were later condensed for pacing. Studio and production pressures led to substantial edits, shortening certain sequences and removing scenes considered too complex or disturbing for mainstream audiences. The adaptation emphasized kinetic animation and visual spectacle over narrative subtlety, streamlining character motivations while preserving the essential story arc. Key philosophical elements concerning power, human evolution, and ethical dilemmas were reduced to fleeting moments, leaving only an echo of the intended narrative depth. Nonetheless, storyboarded sequences in the manga source material reveal the richer, darker world Otomo initially imagined. The final film retains remarkable intensity and atmosphere, but the original script promised a deeper exploration of societal collapse, psychic awakening, and human vulnerability, a vision only partially realized on screen. The contrast between the two serves as a testament to the compromises inherent in translating complex visionary scripts into cinematic reality. FACT9 Terminator 2 Judgment Day 1991. Before James Cameron's Terminator 2 reached theaters, the original script explored a far darker vision of the future war against the machines. Early drafts included extended sequences detailing the dystopian aftermath of Skynet's rise, along with morally complex interactions between humans and cyborgs.
Scenes depicting the psychological trauma experienced by John Connor were far more intense, emphasizing the harsh realities of surviving a post-apocalyptic world.
The T-800's programming contained subtler nuances, exploring themes of free will and the ethical paradox of obedience. Studio intervention demanded a more streamlined narrative prioritizing action and spectacle over psychological depth. Scenes that illustrated the bleakness of war and the existential implications of artificial intelligence were either truncated or removed entirely. Certain violent sequences were toned down to comply with rating standards, while the pacing was adjusted to maintain suspense and maintain mass appeal. These changes shifted the film from a harrowing meditation on technology to a thrilling blockbuster with a clearer, more heroic trajectory. Yet glimpses of the original vision survive in deleted scenes and concept art. The interplay between man and machine, the ethical quandaries, and the chilling vision of a world dominated by Skynet are subtly preserved, offering hints of what the script had intended. The theatrical version, while iconic and visually revolutionary, serves as both a spectacle and a reminder of the compromises required to bring a complex philosophical script to the screen. FACT10 Alien 1979. Ridley Scott's Alien initially had a script that was even more relentless in tone, with additional scenes that explored the psychological strain on the crew of the Nostromo and the alien's life cycle in grimmer detail. Early drafts included prolonged sequences of isolation, subtle hints at corporate exploitation of the crew, and a more grotesque portrayal of the xenomorph's biology. The ship itself was envisioned as a far more claustrophobic and mechanized labyrinth, amplifying tension and dread. Studio concerns over pacing and audience comfort prompted the removal of several intense sequences, including extended crew interactions and exploratory missions that would have deepened the narrative's psychological horror. The Xenomorph's introduction was made slightly less graphic, while moments of suspense were heightened through selective editing. Scott lamented that certain elements of the alien's design and behavioral intricacies were simplified to maintain a cinematic rhythm and rating accessibility. Despite these cuts, the released film remains a masterclass in tension and atmosphere, yet script drafts and storyboards reveal a narrative of even greater darkness and ingenuity. The lost layers provoke reflection on how much more harrowing the experience might have been and how studio intervention shapes not only the story told, but the fear itself. FACT 11, RoboCop 1987. Before Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop reached its final cut, the original script was even darker, with far more satirical and politically charged commentary than audiences experienced. Early drafts included extended depictions of corporate corruption, police brutality, and the ethical consequences of mechanizing law enforcement. Scenes of public reaction to RoboCop's emergence were more graphic, with social unrest and media manipulation playing central roles in the story. Studio pressure led to the trimming of these provocative sequences, softening both the satire and the violence in favor of a streamlined action narrative. Characters were simplified, and the philosophical questions about identity, autonomy, and the soul of a man trapped in machinery were made subtler. Deleted scenes, storyboard drafts, and director interviews reveal a more uncompromising vision, one where the societal implications of advanced technology were far more pronounced and unsettling. Even in its theatrical release, RoboCop retains a chilling reflection on corporate overreach and human dehumanization. But the original script promises a level of narrative depth that modern audiences can only glimpse through lost footage and historical documentation. FACT 12, The Fifth Element, 1997. Before Luc Besson's The Fifth Element reached the screen, the script envisioned a more dystopian and politically charged universe than the vibrant, almost comic book world audiences saw. Early drafts contained extended sequences depicting a society tightly controlled by corporate and governmental powers, with explicit social commentary woven into the narrative. Characters were originally more morally ambiguous, and Lilu's introduction was designed to be darker, emphasizing her struggle with humanity and her role as a savior in a chaotic world. Studio executives intervened, urging Besson to emphasize spectacle, humor, and visual flamboyance over these philosophical undertones. Entire scenes exploring the ramifications of Earth's impending destruction and the societal decay surrounding it were removed. Certain technological aspects, such as the mechanics of the flying taxis and military weaponry, were simplified, reducing the intricate world building detailed in the script. Despite these changes, glimpses of the original complexity persist in storyboarded sequences and early concept art. The theatrical version became a colorful, kinetic adventure, yet it also retained subtle traces of the darker narrative that had been excised. Perhaps this was necessary to make the story accessible, but it leaves one to wonder how much richer the world could have been had the original script survived intact. FACT 13 total, recall 1990. Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall underwent significant script changes before filming began shifting focus away from some of the more psychologically intense and morally ambiguous elements of Philip K. Dick's original story. The early drafts explored in depth the ethical dilemmas of memory implantation and corporate manipulation, as well as a darker portrayal of Mars colonization and the resistance movement against the oppressive government.
Scenes highlighting the complexity of Quaid's identity crisis were shortened or simplified.
Studio concerns over audience reception led to changes that emphasized high-octane action and visual spectacle over the script's subtler psychological and technological nuances. Certain sequences depicting the political oppression on Mars were excised, and the ending was altered to provide a more definitive resolution, leaving the ambiguity of reality versus implanted memory far less pronounced. Actors noted that their characters had fewer layers, with much of the original philosophical questioning removed. Nevertheless, the film retains glimpses of its initial vision. The The tension between personal memory and manufactured reality, and the looming presence of a technologically dominated society. The deleted scenes and original script fragments offer a haunting reminder of what might have been a deeper, more cerebral Total Recall, where the stakes were as intellectual as they were explosive. FACE T14 Blade Runner 1982. Before Ridley Scott's Blade Runner was edited for release, the script painted a bleaker, more morally ambiguous world than the version that reached audiences. Several scenes exploring the Tyrell Corporation's experiments in replicant evolution were cut, while the original narrative delved deeper into the societal collapse surrounding Los Angeles. The script also included extended sequences of Detective Deckard's inner monologues, highlighting his doubts about humanity and the ethics of hunting replicants. Studio executives feared these contemplative moments would slow pacing and alienate viewers, insisting on a more action-driven, visually oriented final cut. This intervention meant that the film's philosophical depth questions about consciousness, identity, and empathy was reduced, leaving only subtle hints embedded in visuals and sparse dialogue. Even the romantic subplot with Rachel was reshaped, smoothing over the tension and complexity scripted in the original draft. Behind the camera, Scott lamented the removal of crucial story beats that would have made the cityscape of 2019 feel even more oppressive. Deleted scenes, storyboard images, and early drafts reveal a version where the moral and technological stakes were higher and the consequences of human ambition far more pronounced. The theatrical release, while iconic, was in many ways a tempered shadow of what the script had once promised. FACE T15 Dune 1984. Before David Lynch's adaptation of Dune reached theaters, the original script envisioned a far darker and more intricate tale than the one audiences would see. Entire subplots involving political intrigue on Caladan and secret missions of the Bene Gesserit were condensed or removed entirely, while several technological concepts, advanced spice harvesting mechanisms, and more elaborate ornithopters were simplified to accommodate budget and runtime constraints. Scenes that explored the ecological dangers of Arrakis in depth were excised, leaving the desert planet's threat feeling muted compared to the script's warnings. Behind the scenes, Lynch faced pressure from the studio to make the film accessible to general audiences. Some actors recalled that their characters' motivations had been rewritten to be more straightforward, stripping away layers of moral ambiguity. The result was a version of Dune that, while visually stunning in parts, felt like a shadow of the original narrative. The richer, more complex tapestry of feuding houses, covert operations, and philosophical explorations remained largely confined to the pages of the script. Yet echoes of the original vision survive. In deleted scenes and storyboarded sequences, one can glimpse a narrative far more intricate, a universe teeming with political tension and technological marvels. Perhaps this complexity was too much for its time, but it reminds viewers that what appears on screen is rarely the full story. Lynch's Dune stands as both a cult classic and a cautionary tale of how studio intervention can transform a meticulously plotted world into something recognizably different. BONUS, The Twilight Zone, The Encounter 1964. And before we reach number one, let's talk about a piece that was too controversial to survive in its original form. The Twilight Zone episode, The Encounter, was scripted with raw, unsettling psychological tension, exploring themes of guilt, prejudice, and the lingering trauma of war. Early drafts presented characters in morally ambiguous situations, far more intense than the version that eventually aired, including scenes of confrontation that probed the darkest aspects of human nature. Network executives concerned about the provocative content and the potential backlash demanded cuts that softened the racial and ethical confrontations. Several pivotal lines and interactions which heightened the moral ambiguity and amplified the tension were removed. The resulting broadcast diluted the episode's original message, leaving only hints of the profound ethical questions the script had intended to pose. Behind the scenes, writers and directors lamented the censorship, noting that the episode's power lay in its uncomfortable truths. Storyboards and script drafts reveal a narrative where the past and present collide in a claustrophobic setting, forcing characters and viewers alike to confront their prejudices and fears. The televised version, though compelling, is a truncated shadow of what might have been a testament to how societal and network pressures can shape storytelling in ways that obscure the original vision. Some episodes don't just disappear. They vanish for a reason, leaving behind fragments, whispers, and questions that endure far longer than the censored scenes themselves. The Encounter remains a haunting example of lost potential, a glimpse into a narrative that dared to confront its audience with the unvarnished human condition. These 15 films, along with the bonus story, reveal how studio intervention can reshape entire worlds. Scenes cut, characters altered, and scripts rewritten leave behind echoes of the stories that were meant to be told. Watching these films today, we glimpse the ambition, risk, and vision that once existed beyond the screen. Which of these altered narratives do you think would have been more powerful in their original form? Which lost scenes or director's cuts do you wish had survived the line between what was imagined and what was shown as thin? Sometimes the secrets left on the cutting room floor are the ones that haunt us the most.